just give everybody just a real quick. I got a degree in agricultural and natural resources from Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, and then I went to University of Missouri to get my wildlife classes squared away. So I'm a certified wildlife biologist with USDA Wildlife Services. I've got 20 plus years with USDA Wildlife Services. Started out in the Missouri program. In 2004, opportunity came for me to move to Iowa. So I've been in Iowa since 2004. And then shortly after that, started getting right into starling control at a lot of the dairy farms in the state, and started learning how big a part dairy is in the state of Iowa. So get into kind of what we do, in general. We are a federal agency, so we provide that leadership and expertise in wildlife conflicts, and generally what the wildlife conflicts are. And like you can see there, a woodpecker pecking on the house. I get those phone calls pretty regular. There's the airplane with a looks like a turkey vulture leg hanging out there. We do quite a bit with airports in the state of Iowa and generally throughout the U.S. And the biggest one most folks realize is when we talk about the miracle on the Hudson with the geese ingestion in the engines of that aircraft. And bird strikes and bird issues were long before that, but that one really brought some highlight to and with the national news. So. Like I said, a lot of what we do is dealing with federally protected birds, and so that's one advantage we have with USDA Wildlife being a federal agency to handle that. So, and we'll get into all the other stuff, a little bit in some detail too as we get through here. So, agriculture, and obviously what we're talking about today, bird control at dairy and feedlots, is a big part of what we do. Nationwide, we do a lot of stuff out west, and then we do a lot of stuff up north when it comes to with wolves and bears and some big cat stuff when it comes to protecting agriculture. The human health and safety stuff, that gets into obviously aircraft, that gets into some disease related stuff when it comes to bird droppings in large numbers, so that can incorporate the human health and safety stuff. Natural resources. We do a little bit with, Iowa's not a big aquaculture state, but, I do a little bit with aquaculture and then also, we get into some nesting birds that are state regulated, like the quail and the pheasants and things like that. And sometimes we get involved in helping protect that, and then property, like with the woodpecker pecking on the house or other property related stuff when it comes to maybe a raccoon or a groundhog digging underneath the foundation or something like that. And so that, and the aircraft stuff, property. So that's kind of a short little, in a nutshell, of what some of those things that we do. We're able to provide, direct control. There's about 10 or 11 of us in the state, and most of us do quite a bit of direct control. I've got some time in, so I get asked to do a little bit more of education, outreach, research kind of stuff, and paperwork, typical government paperwork. But, we try to provide that technical assistance and get individuals, if they're able to help themselves, provide them some guidance to be able to do that. And then the direct control, that's like I said, we've got guys and gals that are out in the field that can provide trapping, shooting, and the chemical control, habitat modifications, our recommendations and things like that we do. And I do quite a bit of work with Iowa State Extension and the university when it comes to education and outreach. And the last several years, some vet students have reached out and spent a little bit of time just to see about the wildlife stuff. And, and then we get into talking about wildlife related things that we do that incorporate with agriculture. So, and it's been a few years now. We did a research project on starlings in the state of Iowa in cooperation with our research center at out in Colorado, addressing starlings at dairies and feedlots. Texas and Kansas and a few other states were involved in that. So, like I said, a big part of our program is reducing wildlife hazard aviation. Like I said, the plane that went down in the Hudson River. You know, I tell folks, you know, I spend some time at the Des Moines airport where my office is. There's no doubt that if we'd had that incident around the Des Moines airport and that aircraft had to do an emergency landing in a cornfield, outcome probably would have been a little different. So, but anyway, so trapping hawks and as you can see, there's a Starling Trap that we used also for bird control options at airports. Ethanol plants, you know, last I checked, you know, there's close to 40 ethanol plants or so in the state of Iowa, and we work at most of them, obviously with that corn-based stuff that they do, especially during the winter months. We address starlings at their facility and pigeons, but pigeons we can kind of work year round. But we do quite a bit at the ethanol plants too when it comes to starling control, between the food base with the DDG and some of the other byproducts that they have at the ethanol plants. Plenty of food source, and then any type of heat source that the ethanol plants produce. The starlings sure love to hang out there, and same way with the pigeons. So we do quite a bit at ethanol plants throughout the state. Feral swine's another big one. That was one of the first things that I did when I got to Iowa. We worked with the DNR, Iowa Farm Bureau, and a few others to do a feral hog task force. You know, we don't have a sustained population of feral swine. Generally, what we'll have is an escapee that's been running around, or a potbelly pig that's turned loose. But you know, the last thing we want in Iowa is to get a population of feral swine and all the diseases that are associated with them. So that's something that we definitely keep on our radar, and that's something that we get involved with the Iowa DNR. If they get a local report, then we get involved and help them out a little bit with either control if we need to, and surveillance and things like that. This kind of shows, you know, we do a little bit of goose work, but with the poultry stuff in the state of Iowa, we were really involved with the avian influenza and helping out with depopulation and quarantines and things like that. So that's a big part of what we do whenever we get those disease outbreaks. You know, we get involved with vet services and a few of the other agencies. So now we get into the starling control, dairies and feedlots. Some years, you know, we get, and I realize I don't know how many times someone has called the office and has said, man, I've been dealing with these starlings for years, and finally somebody told me about you, that you can possibly help us out. There are years where I help out maybe 30 dairies throughout the state of Iowa. Not as much with the feedlot folks, but from time to time there's been a handful of feedlots that we've helped out too with their starlings, but mainly with the dairies. And as you can see in some of those pictures there, you know, that's it's a high volume. Usually we're dealing with thousands, maybe not tens of thousands. There's been guys, you know, and farms that we've dealt with, you know, 10, 15,000, maybe even 20, which, you know, it's a lot of birds. And I don't, you know, somebody says, well, how many birds do I have to have for you to come out and help us? You know, for me, it's, you know, if 500 starlings or 1,000 starlings is causing you some major issues and we can work things out, you know, we'll try to help you out. You know, it doesn't have to be a set number, because even 500 or 1,000 starlings, and you'll see when we get further down in the presentation, they can cause you quite a bit of damage. So, especially if they're, you know, day in and day out and roosting, and you know, we run into that a little bit. Is, you know, sometimes the starlings are at a dairy for a few hours feeding in the afternoon or a few hours in the morning, and then some folks have them, you know, they're there all day long. They roost in the barns at night, and they never leave. So, you know, we deal with all those kind of scenarios. So, and for those, I mean, most of you probably what a starling looks like, and flocks of 100 to 10,000. We like I said, we see a lot of that. A lot of birds throughout the state. I don't know, and throughout the country. We've not put a big dent in the starling population, even though we try to help a lot of folks out and reduce that population down at their facility. There still seems to be year to year plenty. And, people ask, where do they come from? And what, like me at the airport, around the terminal and the jet bridges, whenever you come to the airport, there are those walkways and stuff. There's cracks and crevices. You'd be amazed at how many starlings are nesting in facilities like that, or in barns, or somebody's got a little loose siding on their house. And, and what I've found is starlings, sometimes they'll have 5 or 6 babies in a nest setting. And sometimes they'll have 3 or 4 settings in a summertime. So, 2 starlings could turn into a dozen to 16 starlings fairly quickly. So we try to get after the nesting part of it too, whenever I can. One thing that helps us out with the starlings is that they're not protected federally or state. So we're able to loosen up the reins when it comes to control activities. And we'll get into a little bit, recently a lot of folks have had quite a few pigeons that they've asked us to address, and the house sparrows. Honestly, the sparrows are starting to be a common one too. A lot of the guys, when they call about the starlings, and I get there and they've got hundreds of sparrows, maybe not thousands, but hundreds, and they're like, man, can we do something with those? We have options for the pigeons and sparrows. It's just, they're a little difficult. They're a little different habits, and the way we control the starlings, a little different because of how the starlings feed and how they react. It's a little different with the pigeons and sparrows. So we have options. Some of them are just not, we just struggle with getting large volumes removed in one setting like we can with the starlings. So we'll get into kind of, European starling control, and I don't know exactly. Some of these pictures look familiar. That I think a lot of them are from Iowa. Missouri and Iowa, we share one big boss. The state director covers 2 states. A lot of the agency have, they just cover one state director as one state, and kind of controls the personnel in that state. Missouri and Iowa share one state director and personnel. In Missouri, pretty much stay in Missouri, but we can share somebody if I need help. In the same way with Iowa folks. But, there's about, like I said, I can't remember if I said, there's about 10 or 11 of us in the state of Iowa. When I started in 2004, I was the only one in the state. And as we grew and was able to provide services, we were getting more individuals that were requesting, and which required more individuals to provide that help. And starling control was one of those that when we start getting phone calls in the middle of October, when starlings start building up, sometimes it's the end of March or even the first part of April before, the starling calls start ending in the office. So that's that can be quite a bit of time spent on starling control. And there was a number of years that I was doing it and doing my best to try to help out as many folks as I can. And we'll go through, through the process here. So, and that's one of those things where we talk about economic losses. I generally, if you call me and ask, and we do the process, is I ask, if you got an idea of what the economic loss is. And that's a little bit for our benefit, as that, we get asked all the time, why do we need wildlife services? And we say, well, we help dairy farmers out. Well, how much does it cost to support us and to support bird control for dairy farmers. Does it cost, $10,000 to support Iowa dairy producers with starling control, and it only costs them $1,000 worth of damage? And so we try to get the economic losses and have you kind of give us an idea so we can justify, hey, there's a need for us to do what we do because of the damages. And then also into the disease transmission from livestock to humans and from livestock farm to livestock farm. And you'll notice that if you've had starlings, that a lot of those birds will travel from farm to farm and carry those diseases with them from farm to farm. So, the economic losses, I'm not an expert. I grew up with on a hog farm and a little bit of row crop. So I'm not an expert when it comes to all the different things with diseases and milk production and things like that. But, that's usually what we ask. And I've been told that, if somebody loses a cow, and there's been times where they said, my vet said, it could have been, it had bird issues and droppings in the water, and suspect maybe the cow, might have expired due to some disease related to the birds. That cow produces so much a day, and you can kind of figure up, well, if I lose that cow, how much have I lost by just losing a cow? So those are the things that we try to get information from you on. So, and we've got some numbers that people have, like I said, starlings have been an issue, and we do a lot of research with them. 1,000 birds, consuming nearly 10 pounds in a minute, and 900 pounds in a week, and that's just 1,000 birds. And most folks, when we and looking at that rooftop there, that's probably 5,000 birds right there. But that's real common to what we're dealing with when most individuals call, 3,000 to 5,000 starlings at their facility. And a lot of the times when they call, they've had them for a month. So you can do the math. And like I said, what's a pound, 10 pounds of feed cost you? And so, generally it's the consumption of feed that a lot of folks say that's a big issue for them. And what they don't eat, they contaminate, and the cows don't like to eat that. So, that's a lot of the economic loss that we get. And, we look at a lot of the times I try to look at and work with whoever's asked us for help. What are the starlings eating out of? And a lot of the times they're picking out any type of fat nugget or anything like that you've put in for lactating cows. And like I said, that digestive stuff, I know that's it's a science in itself, and dealing with all that when it comes to cattle and dairy cattle and milk production. But we look at, are they picking out the cracked corn and or whatever they're picking at? And I have a lot of options, and we'll kind of see that of what I can use the control methods for. Whenever we get to that point, we'll talk a little bit about a lot of what we're doing. But, so the loss, like I said, that's typically what you run into, the birds picking through the silage as it's put out and loafing out there a lot. And like I said, what they don't eat, then they contaminate. So we get into, that's kind of the, what it looks like, the fat nugget that a lot of, we were using like a Propel energy nugget, and it sounds like it's not been produced in any mass quantity recently. But that fat nugget that you see in that slide was what a lot of guys were using. And I'm talking, this has been 12, 15 years ago that, they said, man, the starlings just love picking that nugget out. And it's a high fat content and protein, and when it's, negative 10 degrees, those starlings are seeking that out to eat. And so we can put a toxicant on that, and we'll get to that, further in. And So that's the reason that works really well. There was a couple of years where I couldn't use a fat nugget at all due to restrictions. And I was able to do pretty well with cracked corn. The problem with cracked corn is I'd have to clean it up, sift it out, get the dust and waste particles out of the cracked corn. But once I did that, it just was time consuming, and had real clean cracked corn. I could put my toxicant on there and do pretty well. It was a good supplement for those years that I couldn't use the nugget. So, this just, Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania, just kind of a little bit of data that, we, like I said, we do quite a bit of research, and there's a lot of states that deal with starlings more than others. Down in Missouri, they don't have quite as much issue as we do, but, I know Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and a few other states that are known for having large dairy numbers. They deal quite a bit with birds, and so we deal quite a bit with the research folks to try to figure out some of that information. And affecting milk production, and that's another one of those research things, and the food consumption, the disease related, and that's what we did. How many birds? We were testing droppings, water, and feed for salmonella with starling numbers there. And then after we did a treatment, if we reduced the number of starlings, how drastically did we reduce the presence of salmonella on the feed and droppings? And so that was a big research project we did, probably 8 or 10 years ago. And like I said, Iowa, Texas, Kansas, a few other states that were involved. And I think that research showed that we were being successful, that no doubt that all those birds on the facility, there was a higher concentrate of salmonella presence on those farms. So just just real quick there, and if you've had starlings at your facility, you know what it looks like when you've got cows with droppings, and typically this is when the starlings are roosting at the facility overnight. I don't see it as much as when they're just at a dairy farm feeding for a few hours in the afternoon, or show up first thing in the morning and leave by midday to go someplace else. But definitely when the starlings are roosting in the facilities overnight, we see quite a few droppings, and either on the equipment or on the cattle. So like I said, we try to really focus in on that disease related issue when it comes to starlings. And pigeons also, but a lot of this is, with the high volume you get with starlings, the high numbers, generally that's when people really notice on the droppings. And there's quite a few other diseases associated with starlings. I'm not the disease expert on all of those, and that would be a veterinary kind of question. How they affect livestock is like I said, I know that guys have said, man, I know that my vet said I got whatever in the drinking water that probably took out a dairy cow. And we weren't talking numbers, but like I said, I'm sure it's an issue to lose 1 or 2 cows. Not even much less if you were losing 10 or 12 or whatever it may be due to potential disease related issues or stress that could be associated with. But as you can see, there's several diseases associated with starlings and pigeons also. And so the recent study with the National Wildlife Research Center at the 10 feedlots, like I was mentioning, kind of see the numbers there. Starlings and the percent, of starlings, cattle feed, water, and cattle fecal samples. And that's basically a lot of what I was doing in Iowa was sampling the water and the feed and the fecal matter, and they were testing it for salmonella presence in those.
No, I'll try to stop down and look at them first.
So we get into some of the damage management part, habitat modifications, exclusion, kind of the, and I realize when you talk dairy, and a few guys have used that netting and stuff over their roof cap area that a lot of the starlings are funneling down through. They may have some type of barriers or windbreaks for along the edges and have their garage doors shut, especially during the real bitter cold stuff. But the starlings will come through the roof cap, and they've done netting and stuff. But I tell you, it seems like you do that and you can help, but it just seems like for whatever reason, boy, those starlings just get in there and still, no matter how much you seem like you're putting up, they always seem to find a way to get in. So the biggest thing that we've got for help, honestly, is probably the lethal control option, and we'll get into that when it comes to using a toxicant, and for the money and the manpower that it takes to reduce 5,000 starlings down to 500 starlings, us using the toxicant option is really probably the best thing for most folks. So that's where we get into the cap on top of some of the facilities and using exclusion. And then patching any holes and things like that. That's just maintenance stuff that that we recommend, and sometimes it's easy for individuals and most folks realize what they can do to help out without us telling. But we make those recommendations where need to be. There's some noise harassments, and a lot of folks say they use their firearms and get after them with the shotgun and things like that. But in all reality, you've got a full day of doing. And I've grown up on a farm. I know there's a lot more to do than just being able to harass birds. And you may get a Sunday afternoon and grab the 12-gauge shotgun and go out and bust away on them a little bit. But in all reality, yeah, you may spook them out a little bit, and you may take a few. But the next day, if you're not right back at it again for hours on end, they're back there by the thousands. So the harassment's an option, but it's not super feasible when it comes to dealing with large numbers of starlings or even pigeons sometimes. Trapping. Honestly, this is a new one where we started to talk to folks about putting up a starling trap, and that's where, that 24/7, it's basically, there's different designs there, as you can see, but it's kind of like a minnow trap. They funnel them down through a narrow door, and they don't figure how to get back out. And so, is it the cure-all? It's not. If you've got 10,000 or 5,000 starlings at your dairy farm and you've got a couple of these traps set up, you may get 100 birds in a day. You may get 50, you may get 100, you may get 150. And you can say, that does seem to add up, but, well, then what do? You get all those starlings, and there's different designs that I can sure provide that information to how to, develop those. And we've loaned a couple out so guys could give it a shot to see if it works out, to check the trap. Like I said, it works. But if you've got 5,000 starlings and you get, 100 or 150 and throughout the week, you could say you're making a difference. But in all reality, you can see that, boy, you gotta get a lot more than that to make a dent. But it is an option, and it does work. So a couple of the, and I think this is probably terms, Avitrol and Starlicide, it's out there. And we've had folks that have especially used the Starlicide before. And our experience is it works on starlings. It's just that it seems like they really got to eat a lot of it to put them down. And it just, they just don't seem to do that. Not to say the guys haven't had a little bit of luck with it. It's just the fact that they got to eat so much of it to an individual bird to put them down, that it's not as successful as the DRC 1339 that USDA can use only. And that's a lot of what we do. If you call and say, hey, I've got whatever number of birds, I'd like to do some control. What do you got? I'm going to recommend the DRC 1339 9 out of 10 times for your facility. We do a little pre-baiting, and we'll get into that. And then we get the birds accustomed to eating, and we put out the hot stuff. And I'm not saying it happens all the time, but if things go well, and there are some factors, and we got to work around weather and things like that to make it happen. But if you've got 5,000 birds and we can knock it down to 500 birds in just one treatment, we're going to call that a success. And I always kind of joke, if we get those kind of scenarios for you, I usually get a Christmas card from somebody when we get those kind of results. So that can make a world of difference on your facility if you go from 5,000 just down to 500. So that toxicant, it's designed for starlings. We can also use it on pigeons. We've got that capability. Just the way pigeons feed, it's not quite as successful as we are with the starlings, but very sensitive for the starlings. And a lot of folks ask, well, how quick does it work? If you're that facility that has birds first thing in the morning eating at your spot, and we put it out at 8 o'clock in the morning after you fed, and that's a good time for you. By 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon, you're starting to notice birds aren't flying quite right. They're real sluggish. And generally by that next day, you've noticed that's where we get in that, man, only got 500 birds today after the treatment the day before. So, generally, where do they go, and how does that work with the birds? If they're roosting at your facility, they're going to expire overnight. If they're not roosting at your facility, they're going to expire overnight somewhere. And I've run into folks that say, well, they eat at my spot, but they go down to my neighbor's and he has them during the nighttime, or they go into a pine grove or an evergreen grove in the neighboring town. And, those are things we got to work around, but we try to help out with that. So, the benefits with this is the non-targets, very little risk. It's a small powder, that 1339. It's a fine powder, and when we're talking, how much do you need? Let's say to try to take 5,000 birds down to 500. Really, just a couple tablespoons is all it takes to make that happen. And mammals and generally resistant, because everybody's like, well, what if my cows eat it? Well, your cow could eat the whole batch, and a 25-pound bag of that fat nugget mixed in with a couple tablespoons, and we're not going to have any issues. And secondary poisoning, because that'll be the other thing. Well, what if my cat eats a dead starling? Well, your cat's going to have to eat 50 of them. And those are just scenarios we just don't have happen. Your cat's not going to do that. So that's the benefits with using this. So far out of my 17, 18 years in the state of Iowa doing this, I've not had any issues at all with risk. So the biggest thing, and what's highlighted here, and these next several slides, we're going to kind of go through what we're talking and how things work. and I'm gonna, this is where I'm gonna reach out, and you folks that are on can and see. So bait drop off and working with you on the consulting with what the plan is. You know, we'll talk on the phone, and then a lot of times we'll go face to face and see what you've gotten, and then I give the individual my spiel of how we can be successful for you. Uh, the bait drop off and the pre-baiting, and this is where we run into. So I am a federal agency, but we have to charge, and I've got a slide that kind of shows that a little bit. So we ask that the individuals that we're working with to help pre-bait and stuff, that especially if you're already, you know, my office is in Des Moines, and I've got a couple individuals that could help out too. But for me to drive all the way to Dubuque, and I have many times, I'm going to ask to saving costs for you, and my time is to help me out with the pre-baiting. And it's, you know, and it's nothing difficult. It's just working with you to work to be able to be successful with the treatment, and then, you know, we'll put out the hot stuff, and then, you know, we follow up with you, because the goal is to you know, you're paying a little bit for your hard-earned money for us to be helpful for you. We want to be successful, and there's a lot of variance in being successful, variables, and you know, we'll follow up with you to be successful. So we've worked with a few other individuals, because like I said, that that fat nugget has been a little bit hard to come by from time to time. We've worked with a couple of feed individuals to develop a nugget pretty similar to the Propel Energy nugget. And we've had some different designs over the year, but generally, and some work better than others, but generally, if we've got a high protein and a high fat content, that's the big thing, because that's what the starlings are really after when it comes December and January and February. So generally, you know, we know, most of you know it, the starlings pretty much, not to say that red-winged blackbirds and cowbirds and grackles don't hang out with starlings, but when we get a phone call of you know, when somebody says, hey, I got a bunch of blackbirds, I know that 99.9% of the time it's going to be starlings, and I know 99.99% of the birds there are going to be starlings, so that are going to be in that flock. So you know, that's, you know, identify the birds, but, you know, dealing with what we're dealing with, you know, I got to be careful that, not that there would be cardinals or other birds that, you know, that hang around Iowa and sometimes in the winter months. We just got to be careful and make sure that we're dealing with starlings. So, and you can see here that there, where all those birds are hanging out at this feedlot, there's a kind of a tan strip. That's the hot bait put out, and a lot of times that's where we're at, is next to where you're feeding, because that's where the birds want to hang out, and that's where we put the hot bait, because we know we're safe and we don't have to worry about the issues of, you know, sure, could a couple of those birds pick up a nugget and walk it over to the silage feed pile there and drop it, you know, but like I said, we know we're safe when it comes to the cattle, and so, you know, we want to put the bait exactly where the birds want to be, because we want it right in front of their face. And one of those keys to success is, you know, whenever you're watching these birds around your facility, you know, they hurry up and eat for maybe an hour or so, and then a lot of times they spend half the day just loafing. And so we want it to be where they want to feed, so it's right there, so that if it's only a couple of hours that they're really hungry and going after feed, that they find it right away in those couple of hours. So, you know, and so the other spot that works out really well is, you know, your silage pit areas. You know, a lot of guys say, man, those birds just hang out there a ton. So that's another spot off to the side where it's kind of in their face that they're going to find it, that will put that bait out. So as you can see, you know, we've done the bait tray thing, but generally we put it down in the raceways right there on the concrete. Works out really well, because that's what the starlings, you know, that's what they're accustomed to. Not that the bait trays, they won't hop in that thing and eat, but if you're not pre-baiting and doing the prep work prior to, and we just stick hot bait down in there, they're a little leery. You know, it's just something they're not comfortable with. some guys have taken that bait tray and elevated it up above their cows in the rafters. And in theory, you look at that and you say, well, they're up there all the time. Yeah, but when they're eating down on the ground, and that's what they're comfortable with. So that's the reason we put the food where the birds want to be, so that whenever that urge strikes to eat, it's right there for them. And the same way with, and a lot of times it's the same way with pigeons too. So, there's a good illustration of the birds, and there's the bait. And it's a process. When it comes to, maybe I've got a slide or two here of the birds just all over the bait. A lot of the times I know that if I put the bait down and before I even leave the barn, the birds are just covering it up, I know we're going to do really well. Now, there are times where we put the bait down and they're like, man, the birds just, for some reason, they pecked around at it. And yeah, we did some good, but we just didn't get what I'd like, then we'll give it another go and try to be as successful as we can if the weather conditions allow. So there's, another scenario of putting it outside, and that's where the weather is a big part of what we've got to, whenever we do a treatment, to plan. So we'll get into the pre-baiting. Usually we'd like to pre-bait 5 to 10 days, but honestly, 3 days are what we try to go with. The weather changes so much between 5 to 10 days, and my time here and over the years, folks have said, man, I had them here for 3 days, whatever, got snow or it warmed up to 35 degrees, the sun popped out, and now my birds aren't hanging around near as much, so if we can consistently get 2 or 3 good days of the same consistent weather, the birds are feeding. A lot of times we'll do the pre-baiting and 2 to 3 days, and then try to get the hot stuff out. And the pre-baiting is like those couple of previous slides as far as putting bait out, and just the birds just eat on that pre-bait in those areas where they're comfortable, so that when the hot bait comes out, 3 or 4 days later, nothing's changed for them. They've known they've gotten a good meal the last 3 days there, so they've just been trained. So, and the pre-bait is a big part of the the key to success. Generally placing the bait out early in the mornings, available for when because who knows when the birds are going to show up, and freshen it up each morning, being on a consistent time. But we'll work with you. If you're like, man, because I'm surprised. A lot of folks say, man, I don't have a single bird till 2 in the afternoon. And then, back in, and when we get to December and January, it's dark by 5 o'clock. They're like, they're only here for 3 hours, but boy, when they're here, there's 5,000 of them, and they just raise havoc on my facility. So there's no need to put pre-bait out first thing in the morning if it's 1:30 or 2 o'clock before the birds end up showing up. And we keep an eye out for non-starlings that are eating the bait. And honestly, with that fat nugget, very few other birds seem to even come close to even wanting that. Cracked corn would be a little different story, but when it seems like anything eating that nugget, pigeons will pick around at it a time or two, but honestly, even the pigeons don't seem to. If the pigeons were to eat it, it would take them out. And the same way with the house sparrows, but they just don't seem to like it. So this is the other key, and this is just all my years of spending time in Iowa and trying to be successful, is the weather plays a big part. Bait acceptance. Obviously, if we're pre-baiting your farm and you're helping us out, and day number 3, you're like, man, they haven't hardly ate any of it, then we probably there's no need to put out the hot bait. We got to get a different game plan. But, cold weather, snow cover works really well. Cold weather, does it have to be -10? No. 25 degrees can be fine, but -10 is better. Snow cover, do we have to have snow cover? Not necessarily, but as you'll notice, without snow cover, a lot of times those birds are out in the farm fields doing whatever. And, you know, we generally aren't going to do it on days that it's snowing or raining. That doesn't help us out because it breaks down the nugget. The toxicant's still there, but the nugget's not to form that the birds are going to want to eat. But real quick, and this is just one of those over the years, I have found that if you take a 25-degree day with it's cloudy and kind of a north wind, or, you know, it's just kind of a chilly, dreary day, I'll have better success than I do on a 15-degree day with the sun shining, for whatever reason. Not to say that day's a bad day. It just seems like, you know, when that sun pops out and it may a high of 15 degrees, you know how it is out in the sunshine. It doesn't feel so bad. And the birds seem to do things just a little bit different. So if you're pre-baiting and it's been cloudy, and then a lot of times we put the hot bait out on a sunny day, sometimes they're like, man, they just didn't eat real well. You know, and we started figuring out, you know, sometimes that it can make a difference. Not to say that it's always negative, but it just seems to make a difference. So, you know, pre-baiting, you know, this is where we get into, you know, we generally work with the Iowa DNR and the local conservation officer and public health, just to let them know that if we're doing a treatment on your facility, that and we take out birds, and let's say they leave your facility and die, that I don't get a bunch of frantic phone calls that, oh man, we got the bird flu, you know, type of deal. That, you know, if I call the county health department and say, hey, you know, we're doing a treatment in your county for starling control, they're going to know, okay, if they get a phone call, because generally they're not going to call me and they're not going to know to call you. You know, they're not going to call USDA Wildlife and say, hey, you know, did you do some control work? They're going to call their county health department and say, man, I got a bunch of dead birds in my backyard. We got the bird flu or avian influenza or something, you know. So we just let those folks know, you know, say, hey, something's going to happen in the next day or two. You know, if you're going to get a phone call, that's probably when it's going to be. And then after a couple of days, generally, you know, everything's wrapped up. The birds that are going to expire have expired, and then we go from there. So, you know, that's just a breakdown of kind of the nugget. So the treatment, you know, the one of the other keys to with the treatment is keeping things pretty quiet. You know, what we found is guys will say, well, I see the birds over here, I see the birds over there, and a lot of times if the facility's got 3 or 4 or 5 barns, or a barn that they really hang out, and then a spot or 2 or 3 or 4 outside, you know, hey, let's pick a barn and let's pick a spot outside. Because I've tried to, you know, put a little here, put a little there, and we just don't do near as well as, okay, here's a barn that they're in my other barns, but they really like this one. Okay, let's concentrate our efforts and see if we can get the birds here. And then, you know, try to give a 3 or 4 hour window that barn is not having, you know, cows being moved through. You're not doing whatever the checking part, or you know, nobody's going to be running through in and out of their feeding, or you're not scheduled to have your vet come through that day, or whatnot. You know, to give those birds real comfortable loafing in there and spending as much time as they can. You know, and it's even been guys that have gone and, okay, they're in my other barn right now. They'll run through it because we put the hot bait in this other barn, and kind of force them in the barn where the hot bait is, because they are doing a little more activity in the barns where there's not bait. And like I said, if guys got 4 barns, we've done bait in all 4 barns. And like I said, we've just not had the best success if we just concentrate into one barn. So, you know, and to get into where do they go, we get into, you know, either the neighbor's farm, or they stay at your farm, or there's a grove of trees in the neighboring town. And that's generally where they go if they're not roosting in your facility. And so that's where we make those contacts to let folks know that, hey, we're working in your county with a dairy farm or a feedlot and doing bird control, that if you get that phone call, because, you know, like I said, it may be the neighbor in town, and next thing you know, there's a couple of dead starlings at somebody's bird feeder or in their backyard because they've got some evergreens, and then they're kind of like, whoa, what's happening? And starts a chain reaction that we're going to try to avoid at all costs. Communication, or I mean, consumption and loss of flight, windbreaks, silos, barns, you know, those are just some areas where we're gonna for the post treatment that we're gonna check and see how well we did. Most of the time, those birds are gonna expire in the barns. So now we get into communication, you know, and that's where we'll follow up with folks, especially if we get a phone call or two, and like I said, we follow up with you to see how we did. You know, this is just kind of, it's funny over the years. I'll do a treatment, and if I give it 3 or 4 days and I don't hear back, I'll reach out to somebody and, you know, say, hey, how'd we do? Oh man, we did really well. But generally, if I do the hot bait and I get the phone call the next day from the cooperator, whoever that may be, it's usually that, well, that didn't work. So I usually know that if we're successful, a lot of times, hey, you know, we probably did okay if I didn't get a phone call right away, because I understand you spent your hard-earned money. You want to make sure that you get your money's worth. So, you know, like I said, when we try to follow up and see how things are, and, you know, the number of birds removed and how much bait they ate, and for our knowledge and benefit, and also so you know how things worked on your end also. So, you know, we try to shoot for that, you know, 75 to 90%, you know, as you can tell, you know, we're reducing the birds 50% most of the time. And a lot of that has to deal with the weather. And that's, I want to say we're probably a little bit higher than that here in the state of Iowa from what I've seen, you know, that we maybe get that 75 to 90% reduction most of the time. Maybe, you know, 75% of the time. So I'm not saying that, you know, you call me up and we put out hot bait and everything works out that we're going to automatically solve it. But we've had quite a bit of success. And for, like I said, for the dollars that are spent and the manpower, it really is probably, you know, that 1339 hot bait is probably your best option. Not the only option, but probably your best option. So this is, like I said, where we get in the cost of the program, and usually, you know, at the bottom there, $500 to $1,000, you know, and basically if I've got, you know, one farmer that asks for some treatment up in Dubuque, it's probably going to cost $800 to $1,000 for me to make that trip. One, to bring you the pre-bait, and then two, to put out the hot bait and work with you on that. But if I've got 5 or 6 individuals in that area, then maybe it's only everybody's paying $500 or $600. You know, so this is where we get into, I've got just a few more minutes here. You know, we get into, well, you're a federal agency, taxpayer dollars. We just don't get taxpayer dollars to speak of much for us to go out and do this work. And so that's the reason we got to charge a little bit for our time and the bait and the hot stuff. And so that's what your $500 to $1,000 pays for. Is time and supplies and a little bit of administrative process of the paperwork and stuff. But there's nothing to say that if someone in legislative could get federal funds and put in some dollars to help, you know, hey, we got this program, whatever it may be, $25,000 to help dairy farmers in the state of Iowa towards helping them out with bird control, you know, we can utilize that. And then there's other places and federal agencies and that we've gotten funds from to be able to do work related, like with feral hogs and things like that. So there may be an option if individuals have that resource and can and they need to say, hey, Ernie, what do we need from you to, you know, to make something, get the ball rolling? I'll try to do my best to provide that and go from there. So, but there is a little bit of cost for the service, and that's whether we're dealing with the pigeons and the sparrows and uh, and the starlings. So, kind of to wrap things up, my contact information, the 256-5558 is the office number. Obviously, I know Fred has called me on my cell phone, so he's got that. If somebody reaches out to him and wants to get that information, they sure can. And so, and I didn't get into a whole lot with the pigeons and the sparrows too. That's going to be one of those where if you've got those issues, just give me a call, and we can visit. I've had a few dairy farmers that have asked us to do a little bit with the pigeons, and we've spent a little bit of time, removing, and I've been surprised because some of the guys have got 1,000 pigeons, and we may spend a night doing some control activities and take 1,000 down. We may remove 700-800 pigeons, in a night doing some control work. So it's not quite as successful when it comes to the control as the starlings, but we have some options, and we can get into those details if you need to.
I do have a couple questions that we had from beforehand. People had sent to us. Are there any spray deterrents out there?
Not that I can recommend to be legal, or and there's a few that folks have tried, but nothing that I can recommend for starlings to be super successful.
Okay, the next kind of related question was, if you go to the back of some of the farm publications, there's a lot of, bird deterrents. The one I always like looking at is you put that row of spikes on top of your boards in the barn. Do any of those have some efficacy?
There's been a few. They're pretty, site specific, but yes, if you put that there, some bird spikes in certain locations, the birds are gonna go someplace else. There's no doubt. But that, I think a lot of times it ends up being, how much am I going to spend on that if I can do something a little more economical?
Yeah.
So, and then to get into that too, some other deterrents. If you envision the used car lots that have those, they call them wavy men, that the guy that, that flies up and deflates. Honestly, we've had some pretty good luck, especially at a few of the ethanol plants and certain areas of the plants. We've put that up, and we've done well keeping birds out of that area. I'm not saying that it would work for a dairy farm necessarily, but it has shown to be somewhat successful keeping birds out of an area, not farm wide, obviously, but out of an area. So there are a few other deterrents, but and that's one of those where people can give me a holler and we can visit for their individual situation.
Very good. Final question that came in. How come some farms seem to have absolutely no bird issues, and the neighbor across the gravel road, the birds just flock him? Is there any?
And that could be, they're there for either food, water, or shelter, and maybe the neighbor doesn't have it in the volume that, then that's the reason they're at the one place, the food, the water, or the shelter. And especially the food part in the wintertime is, maybe he's not feeding something that they really like. And maybe he does deter them just a little bit, and they can find what they need at the neighboring farm without any issues. But there's no doubt that it's not, I don't know 100% that answer, because we do get that quite a bit. Why my neighbor down the road doesn't have any bird issues, but I sure have them, because I'll ask that. Say, hey, if your neighbor's got issues, we can work with them too, because if they're going from farm to farm, and if we only treat your place, and maybe we don't get them all because they're down at the neighbors. But we run into that from time to time, and so between food, water, and shelter, those that got them, they must have exactly what they want.
Very good. Well, we sure appreciate your time and the information you shared with us, Carl. This
Yep.
will conclude the program for the day. We'll look forward to having people attend with next month's program.